Hello, so today we're going to be going over augments. This is going to be a general augment guide, talking about planning as well as picking different augments in TFT set 13. If you do like my content, please make sure to like and subscribe, and also hit the notification bell if you do like this content. So we did an anomaly guide yesterday, so now I'm going to go through augments in the same general way. There's also going to be a more specific augment guide that I'll talk about at the end of this video, which I will do tomorrow. But when you're thinking about augments, there's basically there's a couple categories you can kind of put in augments, but the two main ones are econ, which helps you hit your units in your board, combat, which helps make your board stronger, and then there's like this huge gap of like these other weird augments that you can call either reroll augments, ones that give like duplicators and stuff, or other. But a lot of times when you're taking an augment, you're either thinking, is this an augment that's going to give me some sort of econ benefit that's going to help me with my gold management in the game, or is this going to be an augment that's going to make my board stronger? And that's what you would call a combat augment. Those are like the two main types, and a lot of times you're trying to figure out your board based on which one of these two you need most for the different stages of the game. In terms of augments, you'll always hear people prioritizing and saying, oh, this augment is good now, or this augment isn't good later. Augments, we all know what they are because it's been a staple of TFT. It's the things that you pick on the different intervals in the game, right? You pick one at stage 2, one at stage 3, and one at stage 4, so you get 3 augments per game. When you're thinking about augments, picking augments in certain times is a little bit better than others. This used to be a thing that you can look up in the stats. Now there's not augment stats anymore, but typically the main trend all the time is that you always want to prioritize taking augments that give you econ first and combat a little bit later. Combat early is fine as well. You can take any augment so long as your spot is good, but typically what you're trying to do with your augment, whatever your board is, if you can establish more econ earlier, gold is way more important at the beginning of the game than it is at the end of the game. The earlier you have your gold, the earlier you can establish your bank of 50, and with your bank of 50, you're making 5 gold of interest, and the more gold that you have, the less RNG problems you will face. A lot of times, if you are playing the game and you feel like overwhelmed by RNG a lot of the time, econ is one way to fix that. The main way you interact with the game is with econ, so having econ early establishes you being able to generate your own gold for yourself, and that's the most important thing. I have an econ guide that talks about the importance of early econ, so the same thing applies with augments. You should always prioritize econ as early as possible. Later in the game, however, econ serves more as like a bailout. If you don't have econ established from your early game, it's better to take combat later, because that's when your board is actually going to spike and realize its full potential. So because you're prioritizing econ first, the late choice is usually to take combat later. Taking combat early, it's hard to justify unless it's like very strong or you have a good indicator that's going to force you towards a certain comp. The combat early doesn't necessarily help you as much as an econ early. So typically you will try and prioritize the combat to have later in the game. Unless you're going to win streak in your stage 2, you probably want econ as early as possible. Typically, when you're selecting augments, that's why a lot of times you'll see people kind of prioritize econ, and then the next 2 augments will be combat. Combat is very important, don't get me wrong. A lot of times if you want to make your strongest board, it's better to take 3 different things that all power up your board, right? Getting gold or getting duplicators or getting like any sort of resource isn't that great compared to just like having your units do more damage, because ultimately in teamfight tactics you have to win the round, right? Winning the round means that your units survive and do more damage. They either have extra tankiness, extra stats, extra damage, extra items. These are the things that actually can sway a fight late game. So if you're in a spot where you have a bunch of gold, or you have a bunch of units, or you're in a spot where you're actually gonna like hit your units and hit your board, you're not really worried about that, like you're uncontested and everything's going great, then you really just want to always take combat augments. There's nothing better than just having triple combat and then absolutely beating people, because at the end of the day, at the end of the game, at the end of the day, both of them, I said them together, what you want is for your board to beat the opponent's board. And the best chance of your board being stronger than the opponent's board is having as much combat power as possible. So your strongest board, if you can greed towards it, is to take all combat. That's typically how I try and play, usually econ combat combat or combat combat combat. So when you're picking augments, you always want to complement your units and your synergies, right? You select augments that work well, or they have a good win condition with your particular boards. There's some augments that are particularly good with certain reroll comps, like Unleash the Beast with Urgot, anger issues with Zeri, for example. These are things where they're combat augments, but they work really well with your board. But in general, you just want to try and play towards filling in the gaps. That's what I always say. It's similar to how you make items. We did this example yesterday with anomalies. It works the same with when you're picking augments. You want to try not to stack the same stats because that's a little bit of diminishing returns. There's item guides where I go into this in much more detail. We're going to do examples in this video as well, so don't worry, they're going to come towards the end. Then there's also like augments that kind of serve as bailouts, right? If you hit something on the you're hitting something like on the last augment that completes your board, you shouldn't really try to play towards augment bailouts, right? When you're playing around augments, in some encounters, you can maybe try and like play around a certain augment that you might hit, but you always have to assume that this is an RNG aspect of the game. You cannot just like build your board saying, if I hit this one augment, surely I'll win. I hear this example a lot. This was something with Lone Hero Lux I saw a lot, even in my lobbies and Masters. Like, there were times where people were just building Lone Hero Lux without Lone Hero, and they were just hoping they would hit Lone Hero. You should never hope to hit an augment. There's too many augments to guarantee hitting an augment. There are some areas where you can guarantee certain augments because you can thin out the deck, so to speak, but you shouldn't be playing towards bailouts ever, and that's like a big thing, right? It's not like a high risk, high reward, roll the dice type of scenario. You should always be thinking about augments at every stage in the game, how they affect your board, instead of just hoping that you hit the exact one that will make you win. Now we're going to talk a little about augment tailoring. So this is something I don't know if everybody knows it. I don't know how common knowledge this is, but if you play units of a synergy, or units or particular units and traits, you have a chance of hitting related augments to those units. So for example, if I was playing this opener, right, on stage 2, and I was playing a Darius and a Draven, I have an increased chance. I don't know what the chance is. Like, I don't think they ever stated it. I don't know. I tried looking it up just for the sake of this video, but this is just common knowledge, so I guess they just never properly said it, the devs. But the idea is that if you play Nox in units, you play the Conquerors, you have an increased chance of seeing Nox in Guillotine or Conqueror Crest in your shop. Now, it's not a matter of like what's the most units you play. This is why sometimes you'll see myself as well as other players, if you watch me, sometimes I'll play a board right before the augment picking round, and I'll switch around the units because I want to tailor towards those units. So for example here, right, I don't want to, if I really want to play Conquerors, I want to make sure that the only active trait or fewer active traits, there's less active traits, so I don't tailor things that I don't want, and I play towards like just the Conqueror. So like this early game board, right, if I play an Amumu that has a Watcher synergy, I might get a Watcher emblem instead of a Conqueror crest. It works like that in general. So sometimes you can actually purposely make your board in such a way to try and tailor yourself to get a certain augment. This isn't super relevant throughout the entire game because it's still a low percentage chance. There's so many augments that it's hard to do. But if you are playing on stage 2, for example, this is something that usually affects your stage 2. Right before you pick the augment, you can kind of rearrange your units so that you can try and tailor. I don't know if tailoring in stage 2 is still a thing. I remember I heard somewhere that they removed it or something. I know in stage 3 it always works. I don't know the exact details of it. But either way, right before an augment round, it helps to slightly change your board just so that you can try and increase the chances of hitting those actual traits. Like I said, I don't know the exact odds and exactly how it works, but this is just a thing that exists. The part where it matters way more is in certain areas where you can thin and mill through augments, right? I don't know the exact word. I know milling from card games, but I guess it's thinning the deck as well. The idea is that you cannot be offered the same augment twice. So it, like, this does not change. This is different between prismatic and gold versions of augments or silver augments. But let's say you see gold Conqueror emblem. You cannot see gold Conqueror emblem again. So if you roll past an augment, you will not be able to see it later in the game. So if it's an augment that you think you want to play around, you should definitely take it when you see it. But this can also combine with augment tailoring, because let's say this is where it's most relevant. I talk about this in my encounter guide a little bit more, but let's say it's Vander encounter where you get offered 3 gold augments. Now you can thin out the deck a little bit, because if you're trying to play around Conqueror, there's a greater chance you're going to see these Conqueror emblems, because if you play around Conquerors and you thin out the deck so you remove other gold augments, eventually the odds are going to be greater for you to see between the two of them, increasing your odds of seeing something that you want. A lot of times, that's why on certain encounters, people will play towards certain comps. It just helps out a little bit, and this is just a mechanic that you might want to know about. Like I say, both of these, the odds are still so low that it's not like guaranteed by any means. So I wouldn't really play this way. It's just something to keep in mind. If it's like, okay, what, like right before my augment round, I'll kind of switch up things a little bit, or I'll move some units around to make sure that I give myself the best chance of hitting some of my win conditions if I have those. So general picking framework. So now we get into our framework. Same like yesterday. You have to ask yourself a couple questions every time you pick your augment. So first of all, does this make me stronger now? And 2, can I greed to be stronger later? These are the 2 main questions I always ask myself. Whenever you're picking an augment, you're either taking an augment that is strengthening your board, or you're taking an augment that will eventually pay out to strengthen your board later. So like, for example, Econ would fall into category 2. You're going to be stronger later because you're going to have the gold to hit your units. Something like a combat augment, that's going to be number 1. It's going to make me stronger now. If the augment doesn't actually do either of these things, the chances are you shouldn't probably take it. That's just the way that you should always pick it. If you look at each augment and ask yourself these things. Don't take an augment and say, oh, I hope it works out because if I take this augment and then this other thing happens and this other thing happens and then I'm going to win. And it's like, no, like look at the augment and realistically say, does this make me stronger now? That's the first question you should ask. If the answer is yes, you should probably consider taking the augment. And then number 2 is if it's a strong augment or if it's something that helps you later, are you in a spot where you can actually greed to not make your board stronger? Not like, because that comes at the opportunity cost of sacrificing your HP, sacrificing your situation, and then becoming stronger later. A good example of this that typically I see with people, I'll say it like this is like the meme one, but like the perfect example of this is egg, right? If we go in here and we go golden egg, this is like the perfect example, right? Golden egg. You get huge loot after 11 turns, but it's a prismatic augment. So a lot of times when you take golden egg, you lose a lot of rounds because you're not becoming stronger now, right? It doesn't make you stronger, and you have to properly gauge, can I greed to cash this out later? If my board isn't capable of like spiking, everybody else spikes with a prismatic augment, and then you usually go 8th. This is like the big one where like in the stats in the past, every time somebody took it, it was like always like this has a high 8th potential. That's like the extreme example, right? But the idea is that if your board is strong enough and you think that you have enough HP, you can take strong augments to cash out later in order to greed them. But typically you want to take an augment that makes you stronger. A lot of this comes from board evaluation. So, you know, taking everything into consideration, right? What does my board need? What does my board have? What does my board want? This is the same example as yesterday, so I'm just going to breeze through it. But here I'm playing a Sentinel board where I have lots of frontline. My augments synergize really well because I'm 6 Sentinel and then I have bulky buddies. So all my units have a bunch of armor as well as a bunch of HP. So everybody's a giga tank. So my last augment that I would want to take is probably something along the lines of a damage to strengthen my board in terms of damage. I can also greed maybe because I already hit my main units, and as you can see, this is a 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 6 7. This is level 7, so I'm high rolling this game, right? So I already have an Alawi, I already have a Heimer, so I'm in a really good spot. So even if, like, you know, my third augment round is coming up, I might be able to greed to take one of those stronger augments because I already hit so many of the units that are powerful on my board, and I already have a stable front line. So when I pick my next augment, the choices that I have to go through are, does it make me stronger now that it's good for me in the current spot that I'm in? Or is it something that I can greed towards because I have the potential to cash out later? That's what you should always look at. You should always look at your board, your units, the synergies that they have, take augments and complement each other. So in this case, I have Sentinels with bulky buddies, and then also think about what other augments you can have to kind of complete everything and tie it together. Additionally, you have to factor in the encounters, right? If the encounter gives you a bunch of gold, typically you don't need to take an econ augment. It's just going to be redundant because you're going to have so much gold that you won't know what to do with it at certain times. That's not always an issue, but typically it is an issue if it's like Scuttle Puddle or Loot Sub sometimes. You just want to maybe play towards having more combat to make sure your board is strong in other ways, because at one point, like, you know, if you hit all your units and everybody else has enough gold to hit all of their units, then what, right? The person who wins is going to be the one with the better combat. That's why. Additionally, if it gives spatulas, so let's say you're playing around Loot Sub, you want to take emblems, try and hit your +2, hit those win cons, play towards the high roll. If the encounter gives you an Ornn artifact, for example, like Jace encounter, you might want to take another Ornn artifact. Ornn artifacts are really good when you combine them together because sometimes they have broken effects when you put them together. I have guides on all of these, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. That's like TFT encounters. I talk about different encounters and what your game plan should be for each one. Additional tips that you might want to see, you want to read the entire augment. A lot of times people get fixated on just the first sentence, and then there's a second sentence that's like really important. This happens a lot with emblems, right? An emblem will be like, gain an emblem, or like, for example, gain a Sentinel emblem. And then the second sentence is, gain a Loris as well. And it's like, yes, it makes sense sometimes, but sometimes it sways your opinion, right? You might think, okay, well, Sentinel isn't that strong here, but then if you have 2 Lorises and you get another Loris, it gives you a Loris too, right? Gain a Conqueror emblem, you gain a Rel and a Last Whisper. If you don't have Sundering, then it's really good. If you already have Sundering, it makes the Augment a lot worse because you're going to get a useless item out of it. These are the type of things you should consider, right? A lot of times when it gives you extra stuff, read what the extra units are and read what the extra components are that it gives you, because that can actually sway your opinion. You might not want to, between 2 augments, one might be like, ooh, this is good later if I hope I hit, and then sometimes you read it, it's like, wow, this is really good right now because that's the exact item and unit that I needed to actually spike my board. So make sure that you understand those things because it can sway your opinion a lot. Also, you want to typically balance between augment strength and flexibility. A lot of times the augments that are more powerful are much more limiting, because a lot of times, like, you know, if an augment is really powerful, it's because it's either not balanced because the TFT dev team made an oopsie, or it's like specific to a certain selection of units that have that take out the most of it, right? That's something like Anger Issues. Anger Issues is not that great of an augment. It's pretty shit on everybody, and it's been getting repeatedly buffed. Your Anger Issues, right? It turns all your components into Gwinsus. This is pretty bad on pretty much every comp except Zeri, where it's like game winning if you have this and Zeri reroll. And that only showed up recently because of a lot of buffs that happen. There are some people that are trying Anger Issues with other comps, so there is potential for this augment to be good on other comps, but typically it's a lot more narrow because, like, it's not super flexible. You can't just take Anger Issues and play anything. It's like you have to play a certain comps that can realize the full potential of having multiple Gwinsus, right? It's not something you just put on any unit. So that's what I mean. These certain augments, sometimes they're very strong, but they're very limiting in how they play. And then, like, you know, especially if you don't know the limiting factor that makes it broken, it can be very frustrating to take these augments. So I always suggest taking the, you know, more general augments, stuff that doesn't force you into one particular comp. Something like a Bronze for Life is a little bit forcing, but something like, you know, Blazing Soul, that if you're playing AP and it has attack speed, this is something that can just strengthen a board in any way, right? Bulky Buddies, right? No matter what your board is, Bulky Buddies just gives you a lot of frontline. If you're lacking frontline, you don't have to play specifically Sentinels or Bruisers or Watchers or anything that you play. It just gives you a bunch of HP and a bunch of health shielding, right? These are things that they're not as forcing, but they're maybe not as quote-unquote win condition, right? Nobody's really looking at Bulky Buddies and saying, damn, this stuff's so broken, it needs to get nerfed. But now people are saying the same thing about Anger Issues when they get trolled by Zeri, and it's like, you know, it is what it is. But that's what I mean. You have to balance between augment strength, or perceived strength of the augment, and then how flexible you can play your board. Additionally, upgraded units and items are really strong. Sorry, the slide is a little bit awkward. And then you want to plan around augment rounds to roll and spike your board. Most people are going to be spiking their board around augment rounds because they're going to get the augment, which makes their board stronger a lot of the time. So that's why a lot of the rolling is done. When I give guides, it's always like you roll on 4-2, or you roll on 3-2, or you spike at these particular rounds. It's synergized really well because that's where people spike their board, because they get the augment, everybody gets an augment, everybody's board becomes stronger, so then you usually roll and you plan around that particular round. So a lot of times, like, you know, if you're playing off tempo, if you're playing off the beat, sometimes you can, like, you know, if you make a bunch of items and then you get like an augment that doesn't synergize with that, it makes it a bit awkward and clumsy. So a lot of times you get more information by just planning around doing everything on the augment rounds, which is stressful, but that's typically how you play the game. So now we're going to go through examples. These are going to be some quick ones. I don't want to make this video too long, but we're going to try our best. I said too. So let's go here. So I have a couple, I'm going to go through 3 games. I'm just going to explain my logic behind picking each anomaly in those games. So let's go through it right now. So first one, 4418. I have to find the parts. I'm sorry. So this is a board that I'm playing, right? If we look at my board, oh my god, I'm talking. Wait, let me mute it. Okay, here we go. So this is the first game. So I play a little bit of Conqueror, a little bit of Pit Fighter. I'm not necessarily tailoring towards anything here. I just have like my board that I'm playing to beat my neutral round. If you look at my components on the side, I have a Shojin potentially. I have a Hodge potentially, so I can play towards the Pit Fighters if I want to. I can play towards a backline AP unit if I really want to. Or I can make an IE and I can play around AD. If we look at my augments here, so of the 3, I have Support Cache, I have Cloning Facility. These are 2 augments that make my board stronger. It doesn't look like right now because I have a bunch of unupgraded units that I'm going to win in this particular stage of the game because it's very early on. However, I do have Raining Gold. Raining Gold gives me Econ and 1 gold every round. That's going to establish my Econ very fast. It's going to make me very rich, which will help me allow out a lot more late game. So here, my priority is that I'm probably going to take Raining Gold. So I'm going to roll Cloning Facility first because I think of the 2 combats, I'd rather take Support Cache if I really wanted to. Or maybe I roll Support Cache first. I think I'm probably going to roll both of these anyways. I'm just going to take Raining Gold. So I'm scouting a little bit. I'm trying to see how strong everybody is. Fractured Crystal, very narrow. So it's quite strong if you're in a spot to play Nocturne reroll. Am I in a spot to play Nocturne reroll? Probably not, so I'm not going to force towards it. So what do I take? Raining Gold. There is Pumping Up as well. There's an argument that you can take Pumping Up. Pumping Up scales really well into late game, and it's good in general for a variety of units, because just getting a bunch of attack speed is good on both AD units as well as AP units. Helps AP units to cast, helps AD units to do damage, excuse me. But here, I just decide I'm just going to take Raining Gold, right? I don't think I'm going to be able to win the round, and now I can just set up my bank, right? As you can see, I'm already making 10 gold. I'm already at 1 econ interval just off of the augment. I can sell units, make 20, or I can level and I can play a semi-decent board and still be making 10. So it establishes my econ early, and that's what I want. So because I took econ early, what it means is that later in this game, I want to take combat. I want to make sure that I balance my augment choices now. This is I think it's a Vander encounter if I'm not, I forget what encounter this is. I should have checked before the video, so I apologize. But now we go to the next one, right? It's Prismatic. So if we looked at my board, right, the way my board shaped out, I'll go a little bit further back, just in case you didn't see. So the way my board shaped out is I found this Zoe randomly in my back line. So I'm thinking maybe I can play around Rebels. Maybe I can play like some sort of line like that. But I also have a 4 Sentinel front line. As you can see, I have a Loris on my field and I have a Loris on my bench here, which is quite important. Because when we get our augment, right, so the augment's going to come in 3, 2, 1, I can't count. We have Sentinel Crown, right? So I'm already playing around Sentinels. Sentinel Crown isn't that strong because I don't necessarily know if I want to play Vertical Sentinel. Usually when you take Sentinel Crown, it's usually play 6 Sentinel, and you're usually playing around Heimerdinger. I already have a Zoe, so I might just want to play Rebels here, I don't know. So Sentinel Crown isn't like my first pick. But I really want a combat augment. I want something that's like quote-unquote combat. But I want something that makes my board stronger right now, because I already sacrificed my stage 2. As you can see, if you look on the side, it's a little bit dull because it's augment round. I lost a lot of HP because I took Raining Gold. I took something that I said I'm going to greed on stage 2 because you don't lose that much health on stage 2 anyways. So I'm greeding to make myself stronger later, right? I'm making myself rich later. But in turn, I've sacrificed a bunch of HP. I don't want to take something here that makes me sacrifice more HP, because then I'll be in such a bad spot that I won't be able to, I'll be screwed. It'll be over. So the game will be over before I even get like my board. Like, it doesn't matter how much gold I have, I'm going to be dead. You know what I mean? So what I want to do here is I want to get something that makes my board stronger right now. Sentinel Crown doesn't necessarily always make your board stronger. However, I'm Loris paired. It gives me a Crown Guard and a Loris. So it actually upgrades my Loris. And that's a huge benefit right here, because upgrading my Loris, I basically have a Loris 2-star for the entirety of stage 3, which will definitely help me out a lot more than something like Buried Treasures. Buried Treasures, it gives me items, but it's mostly that you're trying to get like a huge magnitude of items and make all of these carries and become very strong later. I don't think I can afford to greed for Buried Treasures. And Sponging, it is a good combat, and Flurry of Blows is a good combat, but Flurries of Blows, I don't really have units to make use of it, because I really only have like 1 or 2 backline units. So I either have to take Flurry of Blows or Sentinel Crown here. In my opinion, these are the 2 better options. I'm the carry now is also good, but I'm already 4 Sentinels, so I don't think I need more frontline. So I'm either picking Sentinel Crown or Flurry of Blows. They're both valid. I take Sentinel Crown here because it upgrades my Loris. Right? I think I see the benefit of a Loris 2 much more than something else. Even though I'm going to be contested Sentinels, that guy has Sentinels as well. I'm going to take Sentinel Crown. It's more forcing, but it upgrades my Loris, and it gives me an item that I can put on the Loris. So this helps me in my mid game, right? That's something that immediately makes me stronger. Additionally, because I have the Sentinel emblem, I can also just play 6 Sentinel instantly right now, because I already have the Loris. So as you can see, it's a little bit high roll. There's a rel in my shop, but if I needed to, if I felt like I was in dire straits, I can roll for a rel here, and then just play 6 Sentinel, which is what I end up doing here, which stabilizes my game in the mid game. And then eventually we get to our final anomaly, which again, I want combat, right? I want to be as strong as possible. As you can see, I didn't really lose any rounds. I lost like 1 round in the entirety of stage 3. So I'm at 71 HP. And then here, I'm looking for something to make my board stronger. I'm playing Sentinels. Bulky Buddies gives HP. It makes everybody into a Giga Tank. So I'm basically probably going to take Bulky Buddies. It's probably the best thing I can hit here. Next to like a backline damage dealer type situation. But Bulky Buddies is perfectly fine. It's a silver augment, so it's not that strong. But I already rolled early because I had so much gold, because I established my gold early. I rolled early because I was contested on Sentinels. I found a Jace. Jace is going to be my main carry. I'm going to transfer items over to Jace. I'm going to play around Heimer, Jace, Alawi, Sentinels, and that's my game, right? So early econ, combat, make myself strong in my mid game, and then combat to end to cap out my board to make it really high. And I think I ended up with like a 3rd this game. I kind of fumbled a little bit. It was a game I played today on stream. You can watch the VOD if you really want to see it. Wasn't my best game, but wasn't my worst game. So we're pretty happy about that. Okay, next game. So we're going to go through 3 of these, just because I think I have the time before. I'll double check. Yeah, 26 minutes. We can do it. We can do 3. We can do 3 today. This is an Mbessa Galaxy. So in Mbessa Galaxy, people are going to have their win cons. Maybe I want to take a spatula to play around a spatula. Right now, I have a decent Sorcerer spot, right? If you look at it, I have a Zyra upgraded. I have Sorcerer emblem on my dummy. I can probably play around Sorcerers here. I'm going to tailor in Automata and Sorcerers, right? I'm not sure if it works on stage 2, by the way. Don't quote me on it. I always do it just in case, because you can never know. Even whatever the devs say, I don't trust them all the time. So I tailor on stage 2 just to be safe. I think somebody said it doesn't work. I don't know for sure. But I'm tailoring Sorcerer as well as Automata, because both of those emblems could be game winning. I already can win the game maybe with 8 Sorcerers or 6 Automata. They're both very strong, but I want to play towards one of those. If I get an extra emblem for either of those traits, it makes it easier for me to hit the max cap of the board. So I'm down for anything that strengthens those two. It's silver augment anyway, so it doesn't really matter that much. And then here, so I'm looking at my board. Power up is very strong. The lobby is going to be very wild, so people might spike very aggressively. And here I think I can play for a first. So what I do here is, instead of taking something that makes me strong on this stage, because I don't necessarily know if I'm going to win this stage, I take power up here because I'd rather get a better combat later. So basically, power up is something that's like one of those like option C, like, you know, the weird ones that's like is not quite econ, it's not quite combat, but it's kind of works as like, okay, I'm going to make myself a lot stronger later in the game by getting an upgraded tier of Augment. So I take this if I feel like I have to play for a win, or if I'm trying to play for a win, or if it's going to be a very wild lobby, so I want to keep up with the power level of the lobby, right? I don't really want to play safe here. I want to play a little bit more risky, because there's going to be a lot of wild swings in power with all of these emblems that people have. So I take power up. That's my thought process. I think that I can afford to greed here because, well, I don't know if I can afford to greed here. It's mostly with the encounter. I'm just not sure what the best play is. So I just want to make sure that I have as much as a wild swing as possible in the next point of the game. So I take power up. Now it's power up. I usually want to take power up into some sort of into some sort of damage, right? Right, some sort of combat augment. So as you can see here, I basically set up my game. I'm decently strong in the early game just because my dummy was good. It rolls into a gold, so everybody else has a silver augment. I have a gold augment here. I want to roll these, not to take any of these ones that are relatively weak just in terms of items. I want as much combat as possible. Here I see Piercing Lotus. Piercing Lotus is great because it gives me Sundering. Now, I already have Sunder and Shred, right? I made a Shiv early, but I take Piercing Lotus because all my sorcerers, if I'm playing vertical sorcerers this game, it ends up being like that. So with the critical strike chance and having all their abilities critically strike, I see as being a lot of value because all my units are going to be doing a bunch of damage. I also have a Jewel Gauntlet that is stacks with that. It is not the best augment I can take here, by all means. But if we look at the other ones, I'm going to look for another combat, basically, right? Climb the Ladder doesn't give that much because basically it's a lot of diminishing returns on getting the extra ability power. And I don't have big armor items. Like, I'm not playing a big armor trait to get, like, make great use of the armor that I have. And then Big Grab Bag is just components and items, right? So I already have items. None of these are particularly great. I like Piercing Lotus the most because I just want to synergize by stacking crit chance on all of my units, and I want them all to do as much damage as possible. I already have Sundering, I already have Critical Strike, yes, I understand that, but, you know, we just want some level of power spiking, right? So it's not the most optimal thing to take, however, it makes it so that all my units crit. Right? Eventually, I'm going to have a bunch of backline units when I'm playing Sorcerers. So having them all crit and all of them do increased damage, they all are going to get a bunch of AP. So I still get a lot of value off of it, basically. Right? I know I already have a Jewel Gauntlet and I have a Shiv. But compared to the other ones, they were just items. And I didn't really want to take the item ones because I'd rather just have the crit. I'd rather have the extra crit chance on all of my units because I think that will make me stronger. Right? So that's the idea. It makes me stronger now. I win out most of the stage. I beat most of the boards. Find a Zoe. And then for the last augment here, it's Prismatic. So for Prismatic, once again, I want to find a combat. I'm pretty broke this game. As you can see, I'm level 760 gold on 4-1. So I'm going to actually roll on 4-5 here because I'm uncontested Sorks. So I'm not too worried about like hitting my actual units. I could go for an econ bailout, but that's the problem, which is not taking econ early, is that a lot of times you run into these situations where you don't have that much gold. So here I want combat. I'm carrying Zoe, so Trifecta doesn't feel that great. I can play Trifecta if I was playing Swain Nami reroll with Sorcerers, but I'm not, so I don't really want to do that. What you really are, getting a Warwick. I don't really want to fit in Warwick on my board anyways. It's probably strong, yes. But it's not good in my current spot because I don't have an emblem to put on the Warwick to synergize with my board. So I don't want to take that. It's going to make me too weak. I want to make sure that I'm as strong as possible. I want to keep high HP. 1 buff, 2 buff, I don't need that. I don't need red buff. I don't need blue buff. I already have a red buff and I already have mana gen. Greater Moonlight, I don't really need because I don't really care about those 1 stars being upgraded. My items are going to be mostly on the Zoe anyways. So here I just take Final Polish. You can't really go wrong with a support item, and then the completed item I can use as a frontline item, so that's what I use to cap out my board. Like I said, I just want to take something. It's not as forcing, it's not as amazing, but it's something that's going to give me some level of power, which will I take here. Zeke's Herald is great, right? I already have mana generation, I have a lot of AP, just make everybody attack a bunch. They all have crit chance as well, so make them all crit. I'm down, right? My whole board can critically strike. My whole board's abilities critically strike. They all have an insane amount of AP because I'm playing around vertical Sorks. Let's just give them attack speed. Make sure they all cast. Make sure they all do as much damage as possible. Chalice of Power is also okay because it gives mana, but I think that I'd rather just have the attack speed. It kind of works out to be the same because you generate the mana with the attack speed anyways. So that's my second game. It's a bit sloppy. This is like an example of like, you know, the augments aren't perfect. Right? Ideally, you know, if I got something like, you know, damage amp instead of the crit chance, I would have taken that, of course. If I got something like, you know, my last augment was like damage amp as well, I would have taken that because I just want to do more damage with these units. There's like the one where it's like, you know, you have the backline carries that they get damage amp, but they lose a bit of HP. That one's really good with Sorks. But anyways, all I want to do is I say to myself, stack crit chance, stack attack speed, give myself the greatest chance of doing as much damage as possible. I think this game ended up being a second or so. I'm pretty sure. So it worked out towards the end. Last game that we're going to go through. So don't worry if you don't want to hear me yapping. But I like to give these examples just in case it helps out some of the beginner players. Just to give as many different examples, right? So I gave you an example that was very obvious. I gave you an example that, you know, very debatable. I'm sure people disagree with the augments I took, but I justified them, and that's all that matters to me. And then this one, same thing, right? Confidence, just try your best. Pick stuff that makes you strong early or later, wherever you can be. Choose when you can greed, choose when you can't greed. Take into effect the encounter. So here, this one's really important. As you can see, there's an Ornn artifact on my bench. This is the Jason counter. So whenever you see Ornn artifacts, it's a lot better to take multiple Ornn artifacts. Here I hit Portable Forge. So of the items, there's things that you can do to like try and win out, right? Pandora's is usually very slow. Pandora's is more of like a bailout augment. I don't like to take this unless I really have to. So I'm not looking at Pandora's to make better components here. It's just not a good idea. Artifact, getting 2 artifacts that can synergize really well with each other could be game winning. So I'd rather just take the Ornn artifact. Some people, I see them, they take Pandora's, and then if they don't like their Ornn artifact, they then try and roll it into something better. That's very RNG. It takes way too long. By the time you actually get an Ornn artifact that you can actually use or that you wanted to use in the first place, the game's already over. So it doesn't matter if you hit Exodia, right? You don't even get to draw Exodia because your turn ended, right? So Pandora's I don't want to take because it doesn't make me stronger. Quick Striker I don't want to take because I'm not playing around Quick Strikers here, and it doesn't benefit me in any way. Inspiring Epitaph, it's a combat augment, but if I had to choose between 2 combats here, because I already have the Ornn artifact on bench, I'm going to take Portable Forge. It's much better to stack them. Pyromania is also something that makes me strong. As you can see, I didn't hit an Econ trait. If I hit an Econ augment, then I would debate between Portable Forge and the early Econ, because then it would just help me to hit my board. So instead, I'll just take Portable Forge. Done. So we pop our Ornn artifacts. This ends up being like an AP kind of board, right? I take Anima Visage because none of these look particularly amazing for me. I have kind of AP items, maybe, so I could take Mana Zane, but I just decided to take Anima Visage. And then after that, I think I take a Mana Zane. I think later in the game you'll see, yeah. So I take frontline Ornn artifact and backline one, and I'm just trying to play around like some sort of AP line. Whenever you see Mana Zane, I like to play Dominator Silco. It just helps out Dominators a lot to get those early casts off. So Mana Zane is pretty good for that line. So I'm more angling towards Silco here, which can factor into our decision on our next augment. So augment number 2. So I didn't get to take Econ in the first case here. If I'm looking at my board, I feel like I'm relatively strong. I have a good amount of HP. I won a couple rounds. I'm not streaking because I'm not like giga strong, but I have a decent opportunity to top 4 here. If I'm thinking about what I want here, when you're playing around Ornn artifacts, you're typically playing more narrow, so I want Econ for sure. But I can also take Combat to continue to be strong into my mid game. If you look at these options, we have Eye for an Eye, which gives me components for every ally that dies. Eye for an Eye is really good because it gives you a lot of value for a silver augment. Item Grab Bag, a random completed item. I'm playing AP, so there's a lot of misses. If I get any AD item, I come into a really awkward spot if I take Item Grab Bag. Placebo, it's not really a combat, it just gives you 15 gold, but that's enough to establish me in a very rich way. Like 15 gold at this stage of the game, even though it's not stage 2, it's still a really large amount of gold for a silver augment. So instead of taking Eye for an Eye here, another thing, Eye for an Eye, excuse me, I should go back. So I should mention, Eye for an Eye doesn't look as appealing because even though I was saying it's really strong, I already took 2 Ornn artifacts, so I'm basically up 2 items already. I don't really think I need to make more items. I already have a lot of items on my board. So Eye for an Eye is good, but it doesn't necessarily strengthen me to the same level as making sure like I can either strengthen my board more with Eye for an Eye, which is something that I have to greed to get more components, or I can just accept that I have items that are made already. I have a good frontline item, I have a good backline setup of items, and I'd rather just take Econ. So here, that's why I take Placebo, right? I could have also taken Bulky Buddies, but I'd rather just take the gold. It allows me to be very fast to level 7 and very fast to level 8. And that allows me to hit my board a little bit easier, especially if I'm playing this narrow board that I want to play more towards Dominators. So that's the idea there, at least. So even though it's not stage 2, I want to be very clear. When I say Econ early, I just mean at any point earlier in the game to make sure that you're rich so that you have your roll down later, that you can actually hit your units. It's fine. So I just take Placebo here to make sure that I have enough gold to hit all my units because I really want to play Silco, right? With the items that I have, my items are perfect for Silco. I really want to play Silco, right? Like, I don't know how to, like, maybe like you have to watch maybe one of my guides on Dominators when I talk about it a little bit more. But here, because I really want to play narrow, I want to play towards Silco, and I think I can play for like a win here because I have a good setup with this Mana Zane. I want the gold to decrease the RNG of missing on my roll down. And I think that's way more important in this particular spot than the extra Econ that I would, or the extra combat that I would get from not taking Econ. So now let's go to the next one. So now I took Econ, I took Artifact, which is kind of like combat. Here I want to take combat. I don't need more Econ because I already sacrificed an Augment to take Econ. As you can see, by taking the Econ Augment in the middle of the game, I also lost a lot of HP, right? I went from being really high in HP to being 49 HP. So I'm playing this very narrow line. I sacrificed HP using it as a resource to generate gold and to make sure that I can hit my units. So now, especially with a Prismatic, this is something that's very important. Prismatic, like taking a silver augment, whether you take a combat or a gold one, they're not that impactful to the game because their relative power level is very low, right? So if you think about prismatic augment, however, their power level is very high. If you take a prismatic augment, it gives you a bunch of gold, right? Compared to a prismatic augment that gives you a combat power. The combat of the prismatics is so powerful that a lot of times you can sway the fights way more than the gold could. So that's why when you see Prismatic, especially Prismatic Ender, you almost always want to take a Prismatic Ender as a combat. You almost always, because if other people get combat augments, they're going to be so much stronger than you that you have to really justify not taking a combat here. So when I see these augment choices and I see Call to Chaos, that is just a no-go. That is not a take, right? That is too much RNG, first of all. And second of all, most of the Call to Chaos cash outs are like gold cash outs. I already took an augment that gives me some econ. That's more of like you take it if you want to get bailed out, right? If you're in a really bad spot, it's like, let me just roll the dice here and see if I can hit something that's really strong. That's when you take Call to Chaos. That's not my spot right now, all right? I'm not in dire straits. Flurry of Blows works really well here because attack speed on Dominators when they already cast a bunch is what I want, or Final Polish. So I'm looking at those two first because I really want to just have a combat augment that will set me up well for my late game. But always consider that whenever you see a Prismatic, the Prismatic combats are so absurdly strong comparatively that you always want to take a combat if you can. Here, I had Flurry of Blows. I'm just going to take Flurry of Blows. It's really good. It's synergized with my crit chance. I already have the Silco with the JG, and that's how I cap my board. And then this game, I think I end up second again. It was a really rough game because the other guy was just like giga strong, and I just he cashed out egg, right? So, it is what it is, but that's how that worked. So I gave you 3 examples. I kind of talked through my process in every way. I do this all the time when I'm streaming as well, if you guys ever watch the streams and I'm not bitching, but that's the idea there, at least. So hopefully it made sense along the way. Oops, my playlist didn't loop. Let's go back to here. And yeah, so that is the guide. Thanks for watching. So I'm glad for anybody who enjoyed it. In this tomorrow we're gonna talk about what's it called? The other stuff. We're gonna talk about certain augments that are very forcing, so like hero augments and built differently. So those are gonna come tomorrow as a little continuation of this one. I'm also gonna maybe in that guide talk about some of the ones that I like to take typically, but I don't want to sway people's opinions on saying these augments are strong, these augments are weak, and blah blah blah, because I want to give you guys the tools to think to yourself, can I critically look at this and say, does this help me or does this not help me? And then if you want to know specifics about certain comps and certain guides and certain what does this comp want, how do I make this comp stronger, where should I pick these augments and what, then I have the specific how to play blank guides that help you out a little bit more. But hopefully this was informative. Hopefully it was great. Make sure to like and subscribe if you like my content, and see ya. Bye bye.